that is unacceptable, and I realize that. But I don't deserve to die for the actions of 3 individuals.
Those words have echoed through decades of courtrooms, prison interviews, and legal filings. After years of appeals, motions, and delays, Christa Pike is scheduled to be executed in 2026. She was just 18 years old at the time of the crime, making her the youngest woman in the United States sentenced to death in the modern era. Her case remains one of the most disturbing and controversial murder cases in Tennessee history. Christa Gale Pike was born on March 10, 1976, in Beckley, West Virginia. From the beginning, her childhood was unstable. Her mother struggled with alcohol and drug abuse, often prioritizing parties and relationships over parenting. Pike was shuffled between relatives and caregivers, never staying in one place long enough to feel secure. By her own later accounts, she experienced neglect and abuse at a young age. By 9 years old, she was already experimenting with marijuana. By 12, she was drinking heavily. School became secondary to survival. She drifted further into substance abuse and rebellion. When she went to live with her father, that arrangement did not last long. Conflicts over her behavior and poor academic performance led to her being removed from the home. Eventually, she was placed in a juvenile facility focused on education and rehabilitation. She dropped out of school in the 9th grade. It was during this time that she learned about Job Corps, a federally funded vocational training program for low-income youth. The program promised structure, education, and job skills. For someone with no direction and few opportunities, it seemed like a second chance. In 1995, at 18 years old, Christa Pike enrolled at the Knoxville Job Corps Center in Tennessee. The campus operated as a residential facility, providing 24-hour supervision and training. Roughly 90% of students lived on site. Pike signed up for computer programming courses, hoping to build a future. At first, she struggled socially. She kept to herself. But in class, she met 17-year-old Tabarrell Shipp. He was outgoing and confident. The two quickly formed a bond. That friendship turned into an intense romantic relationship. Those who knew them described the pair as inseparable. They began exploring occult themes together. They wore pentagram necklaces and talked openly about dark symbolism. For some, it seemed like teenage rebellion. For others, it appeared deeper and more troubling. Another student in the same program was 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer. She had arrived from Florida just months earlier, also hoping to turn her life around. Her mother believed Job Corps would help her gain stability and direction. Slemmer was described as friendly and open. She shared classes with Pike and Shipp, and she developed a casual friendship with Shipp. That friendship would become the spark for tragedy. Pike grew increasingly jealous. She became convinced that Slemmer was trying to take Shipp away from her. Friends insisted the relationship between Slemmer and Shipp was harmless, but Pike's suspicions grew into obsession. She began talking about eliminating the problem. In early January 1995, Pike told another student, Shadola Peterson, that she intended to kill Colleen Slemmer. According to testimony later presented in court, Pike framed the plan in terms of a ritualistic act, claiming it would be a kind of sacrifice. At first, Peterson and Shipp hesitated, but eventually they agreed to participate. On the evening of January 12, 1995, Pike put the plan into motion. She borrowed a small box cutter from the Job Corps Center and carried an additional knife. The group told Slemmer they wanted to make peace. They offered marijuana as a gesture of reconciliation. Believing tensions had passed, Slemmer agreed to walk with them. The four left campus and headed toward a secluded area near the University of Tennessee's agricultural campus. It was dark. The location was isolated. Only 3 would return. What happened next unfolded over an extended period of violence. Court records described a prolonged attack. Slemmer was assaulted and restrained. She suffered multiple sharp force injuries and severe blunt force trauma. Forensic evidence later showed defensive wounds, indicating she tried to fight back. Ultimately, the cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. The following morning, university employees discovered her body near campus greenhouses. Law enforcement quickly began investigating. Suspicion fell on Pike and her companions almost immediately. Within 2 days, Pike, Shipp, and Peterson were arrested. During questioning, Pike waived her Miranda rights and gave a lengthy confession to investigators. The statement ran dozens of pages. She admitted her involvement but claimed events escalated beyond what she initially intended. Prosecutors would later argue that the crime was premeditated from the start. In March 1996, Pike stood trial in Knox County. The prosecution presented testimony about jealousy, planning, and the events of that night. They emphasized the brutality of the attack and Pike's behavior afterward, including statements she allegedly made to other students. The defense focused on Pike's troubled upbringing. They presented evidence of childhood abuse, neglect, and substance addiction. They argued that she was emotionally damaged and mentally unstable. On March 22, 1996, the jury found Christa Pike guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit murder. And days later, the penalty phase began. The same jury recommended the death penalty. On March 30, 1996, Pike was sentenced to death by electrocution. She was 20 years old. She became the youngest woman on death row in the United States in the modern era. Beryl Shipp, who was 17 at the time of the crime, could not legally receive the death penalty under Tennessee law. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Shadalia Peterson pleaded guilty as an accessory and received probation. After sentencing, Pike collapsed in the courtroom, crying uncontrollably. Years passed. Appeals were filed. Legal arguments centered on mental health, youth, jury instructions, and the constitutionality of the sentence. Each appeal was denied. From death row, Pike gave several interviews. At times, she expressed remorse. She acknowledged taking a life and hurting a family. Other times, she insisted she should not bear sole responsibility. She claimed she heard voices before the crime and described dissociative episodes. In 2001, Pike was involved in a violent altercation inside prison. She attacked another inmate and attempted to strangle her with a shoelace. The incident led to additional charges and further complicated her appeals. Prosecutors argued the prison attack demonstrated continued dangerousness. Defense attorneys countered that years of extreme confinement and mental health struggles contributed to the incident. Over nearly 3 decades, the case continued to divide public opinion. Some argued the crime's brutality justified the sentence. Others pointed to Pike's age at the time, barely 18, and her traumatic upbringing as reasons to reconsider execution. The debate extended beyond one individual. It raised larger questions. Should teenagers who commit horrific crimes face the ultimate punishment? Does an abusive childhood mitigate responsibility? Can someone who committed murder at 18 truly be beyond redemption? On September 30, 2025, the Tennessee Supreme Court set Pike's execution date for September 30, 2026. The execution is scheduled to take place at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. Because the crime occurred before January 1, 1999, Pike has the option to choose between lethal injection and electrocution. If carried out, she would become the first woman executed in Tennessee in more than 200 years. She would also be the only person in the state's modern death penalty era executed for a crime committed at age 18. Colleen Slemmer's family has lived with loss for more than 30 years. For them, the case is not about legal theory or philosophical debate. It is about a daughter who left home seeking opportunity and never returned. Meanwhile, Pike remains on death row, waiting. In interviews, she has said, "I deserve to be in prison for the rest of my life. I know that, but I don't deserve to die." Supporters argue that life imprisonment without parole would be sufficient punishment. Opponents argue that the calculated nature of the crime warrants the ultimate penalty. As 2026 approaches, attention once again turns to Tennessee. Appeals may continue. Motions may be filed. Outcomes can shift even in the final hours, but one fact remains unchanged. A jealous obsession among teenagers led to a brutal killing on a cold January night in 1995. 3 lives were permanently altered, 1 ended, 2 imprisoned. And now, more than 3 decades later, the state prepares to carry out a sentence that has been debated since the moment it was announced. The story of Christa Pike is not just a crime story. It is a story about youth, trauma, jealousy, responsibility, and punishment. It forces uncomfortable questions about how society handles violent acts committed by very young adults. In the end, the courts have spoken. The execution date has been set. Whether it proceeds as scheduled or is halted by last-minute intervention, the case has already left a lasting mark on Tennessee's legal history. And as the clock moves closer to September 30th, 2026, the words she once said continue to linger. I did something horrible. I know that. But I don't believe I deserve to die for it.